I think Keldor is starting to show some signs of something sinister. Here's a look at Mattel Matthew Universe Origins, Mattel Creations, Demo Man, Evil Spirit of Despondos. Two heads may be better than one, but when it comes to Motu villains, 3 heads are better than one. Our Master Universe Demo Man figure makes his first ever appearance in the Origins line, bringing 3 interchangeable heads with him. One features his iconic Demo Man look, another has a lime green Skeletor-like vibe, and the third is an alternate Skeletor-style version, inspired by the artwork of Alfredo Alcala. Well, now we know who we can thank for Skeletor, but who do we still thank for Demo Man? That award goes to artist and creator Mark Taylor. Taylor had been working on a Conan style of story of his own, predating Master Universe, when he was drawing this character, who at the time was known as the Merciless. Sure enough, somebody had walked by, saw the sketch of Merciless, and mistook it for an early concept for Skeletor. Skeletor at that time was going by D-Man, or Demon. So fans have sort of adopted the name for this character over time as calling him Demo Man. Needless to say, the only way to get Demo Man at the time was through Mattel Creations. Mattel Creations' website, unfortunately by no surprise to any, has since sold out on the figure. Demo Man's going to stand at 5.5 inches in height, or he's going to be roughly 14 centimeters tall. Now, up to this time, there wasn't really much of a bio to Demo Man, until that was Master Universe Classics came along. They gave the backstory of Demo Man that Hordak had been banished to Despondos, and in order to get his pupil Keldor at the time to release him, he merged him with the extra-dimensional being called Demo Man. Of course, having the two merged together created what we all now know as Skeletor. Speaking of Skeletor, though, I did want to bring in Skeletor, and the reason why I did want to also bring this one in, not only just for the fact that he's also got the Keldor body. I really should have brought in the Keldor for the comparisons, but also as well that this head sculpt comes also included here with Demo Man. Also, some other figures of an Origins standpoint. Here's the original Origins of Beastman, of course, from the Lords of Power. Here's also the Lords of Power version of Merman. And even though I don't have Keldor here at the time, here's what the Kronos looks like, a precursor what we get with Trapjaw. To help piece together everything I just finished saying, to come packaged along with Demo Man, you get yourself a mini comic that fittingly is called Soul Keeper. Demo Man, as you can see, though, is front and center, the split psyche of Skeletor on one side and Keldor on the other. There's no advertisements, being that this is a Mattel Creations, so there's no mention at all of other future waves of Motu figures. But though flipping through the very limited number of pages we have inside, we've got Skeletor, though, sort of being torn by the thing that's inside of him. It says, "I know you're in there somewhere, monster. Keldor, remember your promise." And he says, "Shut up, get out of my head." That's not until Evil Lyn comes along and splits the two. And then from that, Demo Man is released again. Mentioning already, there's a backstory to Keldor, and at the very end of it, we get a reveal from Hordak himself. Again, some advertisements there for figures we might get down below. Modulok. I love to get a Modulok. But a nice little mini comic. Again, it kind of helps to learn a little bit more about Demo Man if you didn't already know anything about the character. And put that off to the side. The figure does come with 2 weapons, one of which being a very dangerous looking blade. Look at this. It's all molded here in a very nice silver plastic. It doesn't seem to be the case between the sword or the mace, for that matter, that neither one of them really have any additional paints. The silver works quite well, and it's actually, in fact, the same silver that they use for the shoulders and his gauntlets. Unfortunately, though, there's no additional storage, though. At least the figure does have gripping hands, so if you wanted to have him wielding both weapons, he can do that. I did notice, though, with his hands that the grips are very small, so you have to kind of pry the fingers first away, and then get the sword and the mace in both his hands. Now, unfortunately, though, while the sword works okay, the only thing I did have, though, problems-wise, is I feel like the mace is a little too heavy. It just, whether it's be this hand or it be this hand, doesn't really matter. Whatever hand you end up putting it in, it just seems like it ends up making the wrist really loose. Unfortunately, though, like I said, there is no storage, though, on the back of his body. I wish that there was like a little loop right here, for example. Maybe not for at least to hold the mace, but at the very least to hold the sword. I suppose you could take really the sword and slide it down the back like this. And there's a little bit of storage space there, but there really isn't obviously a dedicated loop specifically for holding his weapon. One thing unfortunately I have to kind of deal with regularly when it comes to this figure is the floppy nature of his shoulder pads. The shoulder pads don't attach to anything, so you're going to find this happening a lot on the figure. I wish there was a way that this would attach. They obviously have made this loose in a way so that if you wanted to take off the head, you could just remove the shoulder pads altogether, and then underneath that you basically just have yourself a regular tunic. Of course, this is the defaulted head sculpt, though, for Demo Man. I don't know how many times I've seen like customizers, talented customizers design their version of Demo Man. Demo Man has sort of a cult following. It's nice that we actually have ourselves now a physical plastic release of him. There has been Demo Man released over the years. I mean, obviously, the Motu Classics did release a Demo Man, but this is obviously the closest one now. This is the Origins version of him. I gotta say, he looks really good. Now, he does have a couple of alternate head sculpts, both of which I happen to think that have been released before. So I'm just going to put them down for... The obvious one is this one right here. This really isn't no different than the one that we got with the 2-pack Kronos and Keldor. The only thing I would say, though, is that the paint isn't as good. You can see there's a lot more of nice darker greens around the areas of the skeleton face. They have still kept the ruby stones, which I kind of would have hoped that this would have been one thing that they would have left off. The ruby stones worked okay for this head sculpt, but being that they are using obviously the exact same mold, it would have been nice if maybe they had left the stones off altogether. It's not like they do any bit of a job of shining. They're quite dark, in fact. At least these ones glowed a little bit more when you had the light reflecting off of them. Yeah, the head sculpt is a bit of a downgrade, I'd hate to say. But if you did want to use, say, this head sculpt for the one that we got with Keldor, obviously it's just a case of popping this one off, replacing with this head sculpt here. I mean, if you want something a little bit more, I don't know, like cartoon accurate, or maybe a little bit more to the comics that doesn't have as much of the color, this head was also a little harder to get back onto the body. But, you know, again, it pulls back a little bit of the detail. But if you like a little bit more of a simpler design to the paint scheme, this head sculpt might work a little bit better for you. Obviously, this head is also going to work with the body here for Demo Man. I'm going to just pop this one off. Again, I don't know what it is. There's something about this socket that's extremely tight. Pop that head sculpt back in place because I don't want to lose this head. There we go. I seem to be having a hard time getting heads back in place. And then we also have this head, which I feel is the 2-pack skeleton set. Now, I don't have that set yet, but I think they are probably using the exact same head sculpt. This one does have, of course, the helmet over top of it. The helmet's not removable. I sort of thought for a way that there would be a way to detach this, almost as if like the helmet is on top of the skeletal face, but no, it doesn't seem like you can actually remove it. Either one of the heads, by the way, can be swapped out with Demo Man. Out of the package, though, I will say, though, that Demo Man's head is really loose. I thought maybe for, like, speaking of me not having an easy time of getting the heads onto the ball joints, I thought, well, okay, maybe the head isn't completely on there. But it is, and it's really loose. It shouldn't be this loose, really, considering it's ball joint and it's a ball socket. Anyways, if you did want to change out the heads, we're just going to pop this one off. First, we'll replace it with the Keldor head sculpt. Or, obviously, the Skeletor that came with the Keldor head. And, again, it works okay. Obviously, I think if you're going to be picking yourself up Demo Man, is the idea in mind that you're going to be likely displaying, I feel, with this head sculpt. Why would you really go back to using a Skeletor? Unless, again, you want to use the idea or conceive the idea that they're a split personality. And, of course, if you wanted to, just pop that off and replace it with the skull head, which I have to say kind of looks laughably small. Clearly, this is a head that belongs to a smaller body. It just doesn't work, honestly, I feel, with like a regular Origins body. But again, if you want to, you can take the shoulder pads off altogether. So if this flops around and bothers you a lot, just simply remove it, and you got the tunic piece instead. In fact, actually, there's a couple of pieces. Like, there's a piece also right here as well that you could remove technically if you want to. It's just something that really does flop around. But I think for this guy to look the most like Demo Man, I'll probably want to keep the shoulder pads back in place, pop the head back in place. The sculpting of the beard looks good. Of course, we now get a little bit more of a lighter yellowish green added in there. The coloring of the teeth look good. You've got, of course, the sockets of the eyes, the nasal cavity of what's left of it, at least. Love the little horn mohawk that he has on the top of his head, and nice little sculpted ears on the sides as well. It's a good-looking head. Like, I have no fault with it, other than it sits way too loose. It shouldn't be this loose on a ball joint. It's a simple concept. You got a hole, you got a ball joint. Having those two connect, you would think that this would just stay in better place. Of course, the tunic is nicely sculpted here as well. I feel like we've gotten this before. I don't want to say like a Savage He-Man. I feel like, have we not in fact gotten this tunic? I'm sure it's released at some point. Underneath that, by the way, he does have just a regular kind of loincloth that's colored in the same plastic. If you wanted to, I suppose you probably could just swap out. The body parts swap out the exact same way as every other Origins figure that we've had a look at. The plastic, though, looks good. I mean, the green is nicely done here. It's one of those few examples as well of a character that doesn't actually have boots. This one just has webbed toes instead. Now, for the sculpting here and the articulation for Demo Man, the head's going to be on a ball joint, but again, really loose. It shouldn't be as loose as it is out of the packaging. I will say, though, one other little nitpick, little tiny nitpick. is that the coloring of the plastic for his arms, the body, and obviously the neck isn't quite jiving with the coloring that they've used for the head. I don't know why the head is a lighter color when you would think that they would have just molded it in the exact same color of plastic, unless it's all solely been painted. But you would think that they would start with a base plastic, and wouldn't that be the better fit, just using the exact same grain and just painting the details over top of it? The shoulder, the waist swivels. The arms do hinge outward. They're a little tighter on this figure. Sure enough, they have to be tight here, but they can't be tight here. You can move the arms forward and back. He has a swivel here in the bicep, which also works as an elbow joint. It's a little harder to move the joint on this side just because, again, he's got this little gauntlet, I shouldn't say even little, this large gauntlet spike that he has on his forearm. And the hands rotate all the way around. This arm isn't going to have as much of the hindrance just because there's nothing getting in the way. You can easily rotate the arm back and forth. And again, you got your hinge in the elbow. Legs split out. Take the legs and move forward. You can move them back. There's a bit of a swivel there at the top. There's more of a swivel down below. Little on the loose side here too. These figures should not be as loose immediately getting them out of the packaging. And I will say they're a little loose in the knees too. Swivel at the ankle, or I guess that would be with the calf section there. It swivels. Get your ankle pivot back and forth, and an ankle rocker as well. Hindsight, of course, being 2020, I probably should have really brought in Hordak and also Keldor. But I was so anxious, of course, to get down to looking at Demo Man. And got to say, he looks good. Built-wise, he's a little loose, in some of the areas. Like his head right out of the packaging shouldn't be as loose as it is. Also his knees. Now, his knees, you could maybe justify, well, they've used the mold before, and maybe just over time that's mold degradation. But yeah, to have this guy already kind of getting loose already out of the packaging, I mean, it goes without saying, Master Universe figures over time, when you have these things in bags, for example, or you're just kind of doing what I'm doing right now, they develop looseness over time, but it shouldn't be as loose as it is immediately getting this guy out of the package. Since this guy has sold out, Demo Man has started to go a little bit higher now in price on eBay. Expect now, the original price, at least what I was looking at when it comes to Mattel Creations, I think the figure was selling for around $20, which was a steal. Unfortunately, though, by the time that I got to it, it completely sold out. But I was lucky enough to find a seller that was listing it over on the Facebook groups, and I got this guy for, I want to say $35, which wasn't bad at all. I was willing to spend that price if it meant I finally could have myself a Demo Man in my collection. I was even tempted at one point to do a custom version of Demo Man. But I mean, let's face facts. There's no way I could match the quality and the care that they did to sculpting the one that we got here from Mattel. Although, again, it does have a few little problems. The shoulders sit way too loose. They flop around a lot because there's nothing really attaching them to the rest of the body. The head is also, again, one thing that was surprising me. It shouldn't be as loose as it is. If you overlook some of the looseness issues that face, and unfortunately, right now, Demo Man, all in all, though, he's a nice-looking figure. If you're a little bit more familiar with the lore, either with the original concept design of Demo Man, or, of course, the expanded backstory that Master Universe Classics afforded him, if you are familiar with stuff like that, you might want to pick this guy up and add him to your collection. Demo Man sure is an interesting looking character, but I don't think one that would have worked well in retail. I feel like with this, sort of the story needs to precede him. You need to be able to tell people in advance, hey, listen, this guy predates Master Universe, at one point even being mistaken for an early concept for Skeletor. Hey guys, this guy was actually split with the psyche of Keldor to create Skeletor that we know all now. All of that can't easily be put on packaging. You're usually only being given a little bit of a tagline just below the character's name on the front of the packaging, and I don't think that would have been nearly enough to draw the attention. If anything, kids and collectors, casual collectors, would have just walked past him and said, oh, who's the green-skinned guy with the pointy ears and spikes for a mohawk? I think this guy relishes better being an online exclusive, but sort of the problems that make this guy being an online exclusive is that he's scooped up fast. At one point, as Mattel Creations, he was being sold for $20. Now to go on places like eBay, you're expected to pay anywhere from $35 to $40. If you're a fan of the fandom that goes along with him, I think it's worth the spending of the $35 or $40 to get him, but I wouldn't spend anything more. A casual collector, I don't think necessarily needs to get this one. I feel like one that actually appreciates the significance of Demo Man. Probably, I could say, spend the $30 if you have to spend more than the $20, because obviously this guy has sold out over on Mattel Creations. I spent $35 for him. I don't mind that. I would have not spent anything more than that. I think anything after $40, probably a little bit crazy. So if you find a guy for a decent price and you like the look of the character, or you like the backstory that goes along with him, definitely worth adding to your collection. What do you guys, though, think of the Mattel Creations Demo Man? Have you guys had the chance to grab this guy when he was first online, or have you now tried to scoop this one up in the aftermarket and hope that you're not paying too much for him? Also, let me know what other characters from maybe perhaps the back. I would love at some point to get a more available release of the Lords of Power Skeletor. Up to this point, I think Skeletor was released as was a PowerCon bulk box set that had the Lords of Power Skeletor. I do hope at one point maybe we even get a Mattel Creations version of Lords of Power Skeletor. But what other obscure character from the lore of Master Universe would you like to see Mattel create next for the Mattel Creations? Let me know down below in the comment section. If you guys did enjoy this video, though, do it a solid. Throw it a like. You guys want to stick around for more so? I hope so. Even though we are wrapping up right now the backstory of Skeletor, we are also going to be looking at some more Motu stuff in the upcoming reviews, all coming your way this week. So making sure you're coming back on a regular basis. As always, thanks for watching. See you guys next time.